On today's show, bombshell report. The San Diego Padres took out a $50 million loan to help cover their payroll expenses. That's right. The sky is falling, everybody. What does this mean for the Padres going forward? How does AJ Preller still have a job and not Bob Melvin? And then most importantly, probably, does this mean Juan Soto's gone? Yeah. Oh yeah. We're getting into it. Let's go.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Thursday, November 2nd. As always, I'm your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno. If you're on Blueski, by any chance, you can also follow me there. I also have an open Instagram you could follow if you want, but I don't post much on there, so go ahead there. But Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno, and of course at LO_Padres for updates on the team. Despite the fact we are officially in off-season mode, congratulations to the Texas Rangers winning the World Series. I would be using today's episode to talk about how the Rangers, them winning, I think is immaculately good for baseball. They went from being a bottom three team record-wise to spending on stars from DeGrom to Gray to Seager to Semien, and then they won the World Series, and yet we can't talk about that today, guys. You know why? Because we got to talk about the latest article, the latest bombshell article, the latest nuclear bomb article for The Athletic that just dropped yesterday. That, of course, I recommend everyone checking out. I'm not going to read word for word everything that happened, but collaboration between Kevin Rosenthal, Dennis Lin, and Evan Drellich talking about how the Padres took out a $50 million loan to help cover their payroll. Is it incendiary or incendiary? I don't remember, but whatever. Either one of the pronunciations of that word, type of headline, right? So, oh man, I mean, there's a lot to start from. First of all, let's read a little bit from the Athletic article just to start things off. Phoenix, despite selling more tickets this season than all but one Major League Baseball team, the San Diego Padres took out a loan for about $50 million in September to address short-term cash flow issues and meet their obligations, including player payroll. People briefed on the team's finances told The Athletic. MLB teams commonly tap into lines of credit to pay their bills, prompting some officials in the sport to suggest any concern should be tempered because the Padres were ultimately creditworthy enough to draw the loan. But other officials briefed on the team's finances who were not authorized to speak publicly viewed the Padres' situation as worrisome. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to start this off with a little bombshell of my own. One of the reasons for the past few months, now this is largely opinion of my own. One of the reasons for the past few months, honestly, couple years, that I've been worrying about how this whole keep signing superstars, don't worry about it, is that eventually don't get me wrong, I don't think that it's a question of affording. It's a question of what they almost want to afford, right? And that was kind of my issue with the amount of moves the Padres were making. Could bring up the tapes. I said this before the trade deadline last year about Juan Soto. I said this before Manny Machado got extended this offseason. I said this before, I think just this past offseason in general. I think I've said this a decent amount of times, that the Padres have a huge payroll, and them continuing to add is going to create issues with roster flexibility for years to come. I believe that, and I still believe that. I believed it back then, and I still believe it now. It's almost not a question. I've said many times, I don't have a problem with any of their contracts in a vacuum, but all of them stack on top of each other, and they haven't resulted in winning the likes of, say, what the Texas Rangers just did last night. And that has been my biggest issue. My biggest issue has been eventually something's going to happen, and they can't just keep spending, right? For whatever reason. Could they, theoretically keep spending? Sure, because personally, not to get too political, I just don't believe that rich people go broke the same way, and there will be ways to just accumulate money, because people who want to make money, that already have a lot of money, It, in my opinion, is remarkably easy to do that in this world, and especially this country, right? Like, that's just how I believe, and if you have a lot of money, they'll find new ways and you just don't go broke, right? So when I hear this loan thing, I know a lot of people immediately panic, right? And one of the other reasons that I had brought this up a lot is because I had a source personally. There's just someone that I talked to who was like, they think that very quietly, and they said this to me, I believe it was like a month or so into the season. The Padres are off to a slow start, and I think that that's why this person told me this, that the Padres were very quietly panicking a little bit. That's what my person told me. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And it wasn't just purely based on them not performing. It was the performing for sure, but it was also just the amount that they're spending and the fact that they have Juan Soto as a potential free agent in a year, Blake Snell, Josh Hader, and they had already spent so much on players that, in my opinion, you arguably didn't need to go for or extend in the case of Darvish, Cronenworth, Machado, guys like that, Bogarts, obviously, especially all at once. And this report seems to validate those concerns a lot. Now, it's not all bad, and we're going to get into it. We're going to get into a lot of opinions on this, but I do think that, that was what someone told me. Like, I think the Padres are quietly panicking. So this report came out, and I wasn't really all that surprised by it. And for the record, I tweeted jokingly about how I deleted it because I thought that it was like a little bit too hyperbolic, where I tweeted like, oh, great, we're about to be like the Mets after the Bernie Madoff situation back in the early 2000s, yet AJ Preller is still going to be the manager, right? I deleted that as it was mostly a joke, but that was my, like, I imagine that a lot of people felt that way, where they're like, are we just going to be like broke and we're going to be having to sell off for parts and all these things? And I don't really necessarily think that. And in fact, I don't even think that this Athletic article did that. There's a couple of different things that they point out that I think are very important. And I just don't think that this is something that's like the doom and gloom. And I do think that, and the article also echoes the same sentiment, that you have to keep in mind when you hear about anything Padres related, listeners and viewers. When you hear anything Padres related, you have to be careful because there's a vetted interest amongst ownership, and therefore, because they're very rich, mainstream media people sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, I'm saying be careful for you to heighten or extrapolate or just really point out when the Padres don't work. Because what the Padres have done has made a lot of owners annoyed. For sure. It's upsetting a lot of owners because if the Yankees do this, that's one thing. If the Mets do this, that's one thing. But they're making other teams look bad because they are historically a small market team that once upon a time couldn't afford Chase Headley and Tyson Ross to just signing Xander Bogaerts, Yu Darvish, Jake Cronenworth, and Manny Machado in the same offseason, right? So there's a lot of people that have a reason to want to point out what goes wrong. This is why before the season, and even though I did know this from my source, from my friend that was telling me Padres are panicked, this is why I was still saying all those reports about how owners were like, the Padres are spending recklessly. You have to take that with a grain of salt because they have a vetted interest to say that, if that makes any sense, right? So there's a lot of angles to this, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more, including an article from my buddy as well for Forbes, Daniel R. Epstein, talking about what this means for the Padres roster construction going forward. That's right, we still got a lot to talk about. So let's end this first segment by talking to you guys about our good buddies over at Ibata. Ibata, one of my favorite names for a sponsor. Let me tell you, I love these folks, guys. And look, turkey is great. Everybody knows that. We're in November. So everyone's thinking about Thanksgiving now, as you rightfully should. Now, I personally am not a fan of turkey, but I am a fan of the vibe of the turkey, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a fan of the chicken, whatever it is. I personally am a little pernil guy. It's a little bit more of a Puerto Rican tradition, but we all know that, forget that for a second. The big thing about Thanksgiving is when you put all those sides together, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I love about it. And with Ibata, you can make sure you get the whole family's favorite side of dishes, or frankly, just favorite side of dishes for yourself, and all the chicken, paneer, turkey, whatever, while getting yourself some cash back. Starting November 1st, for the 4th year in a row, Ibata is giving 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving feast. Just add the offers in the app to redeem for everything you need to make your Thanksgiving feast complete. All you have to do is shop at your favorite retailers and upload your receipt, and you'll get some cash back. It's pretty great on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Other apps give you some points that don't amount to as much. Ibata's got you with real cash back that you can cash out at your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. You can also earn cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers too when you start with Ibata, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. I know I'm a frequent shopper over at Best Buy, let me tell you, so that's big for me. I love it. We love you, Ibata. So just download the Ibata app now and use code MLB to get 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving dinner starting November 1st. Remember, just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibata app and use code MLB. That's Ibata, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store, and using the code MLB. Go check it out. And ladies and gentlemen, we are back. We are back here on the Locked On Padres podcast. Remember to go check us out on SiriusXM. Go check out me on Twitter. Go check out the show on YouTube if you prefer watching it and see all the weird mannerisms I make and the clown show, appearances with the jester hat, my random old favorite figurines and stuff, like Jinx right here, whatever. You can see that as well as Tatis and Pac-Man. So go check that out. We recently crossed 1,200 subscribers. Okay, let's keep going. So the first thing I want to talk about is just this idea of what is this, are the Padres in financial trouble? And to me, from reading this Athletic article that I don't want to read word for word, I don't necessarily think that. And in fact, one good thing about this is that, Players Association is, of course, is full of support of this. Agents love this, the amount of spending that the Padres have done. And there was some good that resulted in this, right? The Padres started the season with a payroll of about $250 million, which is the third most in baseball, and an outlier among teams that play in a similar bottom third market. The investment generated excitement and income. The club set a franchise record with 3.3 million tickets sold, and per a team spokesperson, finished in the top 6 in the sport for regular season ticket revenue. So there was good to result from this, and it's also kind of almost like it's not year one of the Padres spending spree. Don't get me wrong, but it's in the grand scheme of things, it's still early on in, quote, this experiment, this new strategy, this new direction for the team, right? So you still got to see if it pays dividends later on. I'm just talking as a business person. I'm not a business expert, which is why I am reading from The Athletic and Forbes, right? I'm not an expert or anything, but that's just me. You can't judge your investment immediately like that. But what do I know? But, as the article goes on to mention, in September, the Padres had a third-party lender willing to loan the club $100 million. The team asked MLB for permission to receive close to the full $100 million, according to people briefed on the team's finances. MLB gave the team permission to draw roughly $50 million, which the league deemed a sufficient amount for the team to cover its expenses. Look, I just think that this isn't the worst thing in the world, right? And here's the thing. The player, look, how do I put this? Let me just read some of the quotes there. The player costs were not unexpected entering the year, an indication that a turn of events late in the year might have exacerbated a need for the loan. The Padres official, who was not authorized to speak publicly, said that was not the case. In quotes, "We anticipated we may need it at some point this year," official said of the loan. "We're not in a crisis. We're managing the business responsibly. We will continue to do that going forward." I think that there's a lot of different angles to this. And again, I'm not an expert. I'm planning on actually trying to have someone on the podcast to talk about this more. Someone who's a little bit better with the money intricacies of baseball. Maybe potentially next week we could talk about it. But I just think it's sort of attests to what I mentioned at the beginning, which is just this idea that you shouldn't freak out because they're also not the only team ever to get loans and whatnot. Teams have different methods of raising money. Sometimes a team's owner or owners can put more of their own money into the club, but the Padres said to not have made a cash call before the $50 million loan. Like Peter Seidler, they mentioned in the article, could have been potentially used, right? This isn't, and the other thing that the article does come out and mention is that teams outside of big markets have done stuff like this before. They aren't the first team ever to ask for loans and whatnot, right? After any given year, anywhere from a quarter to more than a third of MLB teams might be out of compliance with the rule, and the Padres project to be one such team when the 2023 accounting is completed. People briefed on their finances said it would not be the first time in recent years the Padres are technically out of compliance. Basically, there's a whole bunch of debt service rules. It's really complicated, hard for me to explain on the podcast. I kind of want to get into the cool stuff, but basically, they're not the only ones to ever do this, I think is one thing that the article really mentions, right? But here's the bad part. What this says for the team going forward. And I think that the article from Daniel R. Epstein over at Forbes really attests to this, talking about just, what's going on in terms of their overall salary. And again, another thing that the article mentioned, the Padres' spending has become politicized in the sport, which can complicate industry perspectives. Various parties are incentivized to make San Diego's payroll look prudent or not. And like I said, anywhere from a quarter to more than a third of MLB teams may be out of compliance with those rules, right? So they aren't the only ones to ever do this. Now, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, is what does this mean for Juan Soto? And this is why all offseason, I already mentioned my friend of mine that I told you, that told me about the Padres, his inklings toward the Padres being a little bit in some financial trouble. But the other thing about this that I think is more important and more pressing is, what does this mean for Juan Soto, right? Let's read now from Forbes, okay? As per contracts, the Padres' opening day payroll was just under $249 million this year, the third highest in MLB, like I mentioned, and it was a 243% increase from the club's $104 million. 2023 was also, though, here's the important part, the third consecutive year in which the Padres were over the CBT, collective bargaining tax, threshold, which was $233 million on the bottom rung. As a third-time payer, like I said, third consecutive year, as a third-time payer, they will pay a 50% tax on each dollar from $233 to $253 million, a 62.5% tax on each dollar from $253 to $273 million, a 95% tax on each dollar above $273 million, and a 110% tax on each dollar above $293 million. All told, the club, reading again from Forbes, will owe an estimated $44 million in collective bargaining tax fees. And that $44 million is probably where we get the report that, which we've talked about already this offseason, that the Padres are expected to cut their payroll by about $50 million. A statement / announcement that I think, given the lack of winning, given the fact that they've got all these superstars and it hasn't resulted in anything, they have not had a 90-win season under A.J. Preller. The best they had were 2 seasons with Bob Melvin, this year with 82 wins, and then the 89 wins from last season, right? So again, it's kind of crazy that AJ Preller is still around, right? I don't hate that they were like, we need to cut back on this a little bit, because $200 million is still a whole lot of money. That's totally fine, guys. That's totally fine. It only feels like we're losing out because they've already spent so much that cutting back is almost like, oh my gosh, you know what I mean? It hurts more. If we were at 80 million right now and they told you, oh yeah, we're only going to spend $200 million, you'd be fine with that. It's just that that's where we are right now. So you're losing some as a fan. You feel like you're losing out on potential free agents. Again, from Forbes, prior to the 2023 season, the Forbes gave the Padres a valuation of $1.75 billion. This is an 11% increase over their 2022 value, despite an operating loss of $53.2 million, the third worst in Major League Baseball. That operating loss figure is right in the ballpark, like I was just saying, of the amount the club borrowed at the end of the season, as well as how much they intend to reduce payroll. And this is where it gets interesting, ladies and gentlemen, because with Juan Soto, if you take into account the whole thing, and again, I'm reading from the article basically, but when you take into account the 8 players that are on guaranteed contracts next season, which is about $130.5 million, including buyouts of players with options and all that stuff, there's also another contract with Matt Carpenter that's about $5.5 million, and arbitration obligations. If you guarantee on the contracts, and then arbitration stuff, like guys going up, so like Soto and some other players like Grisham and whatnot, that approaches around $187 million. They also have to pay for pre-arbitration players to fill out the roster, which could add up to another $6 to $10 million depending on what moves they make this winter. As is, team is around the $200 million mark. So, and also, by the way, they're obviously going to lose some players. They're probably losing Blake Snell and Josh Hader. Seth Lugo and Michael Wacha are up in the air, and it's going to be hard. And because of that, how they balance this reduction in payroll from what they had last year, while also trying to make the team better, is going to be massively hard. And that is why, for so long this offseason, I've been talking about Juan Soto. And That's the biggest thing, guys. Juan Soto, the fact that he is projected to be, I mean, the Forbes article mentions that if you go and look at MLB trade rumors, projects him to earn $33 million and 6 players to receive $50.65 million altogether. Like, woo, man, that's a lot of money that the Padres don't necessarily have when you take into account all this loan stuff, and when you take into account the collective bargaining tax threshold, and when you take into account just the lack of winning to maybe encourage ownership, right? They could have gotten more potential money from TV revenue in the playoffs, right? Prices, ticket prices in the playoffs, just putting their team a little bit more on the map in the playoffs, dare I say. They missed out on that because they were so disastrous. I mean, basically all of this season, the Padres weren't really talked about all that much. The only thing that people talked about with the Padres were how disappointing they were, right? All of this adds up and is why I don't necessarily blame them for saying we're going to cut back a little bit, especially because, again, under AJ Preller, they have had barely any like majorly winning seasons despite the payroll, right? Like even the Mets, like the Mets are bad this year, obviously, but the Mets last year won like 100 games, you know? So even we haven't had that. And that to me is an indictment on the general manager. And we're going to make more indictments on the general manager, AJ Preller, in just a second, guys. But before we do that, I want to talk to you about something that isn't as toxic as AJ Preller. That's a little mean. I don't want to be super mean to AJ Preller, but you get my point, guys. Look, it's crazy out here. Worldwide pandemic. Everybody's coming off of that. Just general sickness. Maybe you're traveling and all that stuff. You're trying to figure things out. Well, let me tell you, the Jace Case is here for you guys. It's a personalized emergency medication kit that contains 5 essential antibiotics that treat the most common and deadly of bacterial infections. And on top of that, it's only 5, Javi. What the heck, man? Like, what if I have something specific? Well, on top of the fact that you can hop on a call with some of their licensed medical professionals who can give you prescriptions and whatnot and help you out, don't worry, it's customizable. It's customizable, guys. Jace Case Medical now offers, or Jace Medical, I should say, now offers customability for your Jace Case with dozens of add-on medications. Choose the medications that best fit you. That's right, you. And your family's needs. And they're adding plenty of things as time goes along. So that's really cool. They're adding more and more things to this Jace Case. So you should definitely go check that out. They've even got some gift cards you can check out as well. So shouts to Jace Case because, hey, look, sometimes maybe you're traveling internationally, right? You just want to have like a dare I say, like a care package. You know what I mean? Not like a Call of Duty care package. Let me be clear. I'm not Call of Duty style, but like the Hunger Games style. You know what I mean? Help you out. That little ointment, remember that? When it like heals her and everything? Well, hey, that's what you need, especially when you're traveling, especially when you're a little bit in an unfamiliar situation or what have you. Jace is here for you. Go to jacemedical.com and enter code LOCKEDON at checkout for a $20 discount on your order. That's promo code LOCKEDON at Jace, Jase, medical.com. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, here on the Locked On Padres podcast, segment number 3. We rocking and rolling. Don't forget to also rock and roll with us on SiriusXM or on YouTube or on wherever. You guys know by now, but saying it anyway. All right, continuing on with Mr. Juan Soto. Man, where do I start? With all the costs, with the arbitration stuff that I was just mentioning before, hopefully I explained it decent enough. I'm not good with numbers. I was terrible at math in high school. I was terrible in middle school. I was terrible in college. Let me tell you, I had to study a lot in order to pass very basic things in math. I'm not good with numbers, let me tell you. But with Juan Soto, one thing that I'm worried about as we get into the part of the show when I get annoyed with AJ Preller, a common theme for the last month or so, this report, it feels like it kills a lot, not only the momentum for potentially extending Juan Soto, who's going to cost a whole lot of money, which is why last year, before we went to the offseason, I said we don't have to get big superstars. I was excited they got Bogarts. Don't get me wrong. I was culpable too. It's really fun in the moment, you know, especially as a content guy. Absolutely love that. But there was a downside. The downside was they are spending a lot of money already. If they didn't have anything, I'm totally cool with them going out, right? That's what happened with the Rangers. They didn't have like a big superstar guy, so when they signed Corey Seager and Marcus Semien, it was like, cool, we don't care. Like we're starting right here, so it's okay. The Padres are already up there, And then they spent on Bogarts and then all the other extensions that I bring up with Darvish, Machado, all this, et cetera, right? Not to mention like the Matt Carpenter deal, right? And as a result, you have this situation for now you can't spend as much. And now, since this is like super public and well-known knowledge, I don't want to say that The Athletic is the only way rival teams are now going to realize this, but on top of the fact that it raises an issue with whether you can re-sign him because of your financials, it also raises an issue with his potential trade market. It potentially hurts your leverage for this guy when teams are like, hey, we know you need to trade him. And I've said this many times. I've said this many times covering baseball that we make fun of a lot of those lower market teams that don't have a big payroll for when they trade their stars for nothing. Part of that is because teams go to those teams, in my opinion, and they're like, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? Like, what are you going to do? We know you have to trade him. You know, we know you have to. Hey, Oakland, we know you have to trade Matt Olson. We know you have to trade Matt Chapman. We know you have to trade Sean Manaea, right? Like all these players and good players. And they just know they have to trade them. And then everyone's like, wow, they got nothing in return. I think that's part of it is because you don't have as much leverage when teams know you're going to trade him, right? If it's possible that they may keep him, that's when you have more leverage because it's like, oh, you got to impress us with a deal. But as a result of this is just an idea of how that's going to be pretty tough. Now, don't get me wrong. The Padres still could get a lot from him, especially if it was this offseason, right? Because that would give you a whole full year of Soto. And you have a tiny bit of leverage of saying, hey, we in win now mode, man. Like, we're totally ready to just take this all the way and just be like, all right, like, we get one more year of one of the best batters in baseball, absent your Otanis and your Jordans. Like, he's in that S tier. Does he have some problems as a base runner and his ability to defend? Absolutely. But his offense is so unbelievable, so generationally good, that even for a year, it is still okay to potentially hang on to him. So I do think they have a little bit, but I still think all in all, it's going to be very difficult because you're not going to... I think that there was a time when maybe you could have recouped the value from Juan Soto. I think at this past year's deadline, we talked about that, how potentially, like, especially since it was a dead market and there wasn't just, like, especially when Ohtani, the Angels decided to keep him very stupidly, in my opinion, like, that says a lot, right? Like, that they did not want to go out and do that at this year's deadline. They instead still tried to get it, get themselves over the hump and get into the playoffs. It didn't work, but... you know, it was a quiet market. I don't know what this year's market is going to be like at the trade deadline. That's way too far ahead. The World Series just ended. I can't project that far, but that's going to be a big thing. If the market's hot, maybe you won't be able to get as much for him. So we'll see how that pans out down the road, but I'm really worried about that. I'm deadly worried about that. And I'm worried that the other problem is this. Even if they want to extend Soto, how are you going to fill out your pitching? How are you going to fill out some of those bench spots? This is why for so long I was preaching to you guys about how they don't need to. When they had Tatis, I was like, look, they have the 1 star. Would I like one more? Yes, just similar to the Rangers. I did not mean for them to do Machado, Bogarts, Darvish, Cronenworth, all these guys. That's not what I meant, right? And yet here we are. And I think that that's the issue here, is that I don't know how they're going to be able to afford all of this and Soto. So to me, it's either this is the great 1-year rental, you better hope that they go all the way this year, or it's going to look very dumb. And this is the part where we make fun of AJ Preller because this is general managing malpractice. And don't get me wrong, ownership can be part of this too. I imagine that they sign off on these things. But even still, AJ Preller's got to know, look, man, if you were going to trade your future for Juan Soto, how are you going to go out and then do all those moves before you get to your future? And he's a young guy. I would love the alternate reality where, you know what, I'll even say I'll take Darvish, because I don't want to, it's easy in retrospect to say that I don't want certain players that haven't performed as well. Let's say, okay, we keep like the Darvish contract. I would love if the big 2 guys that the Padres were committed to were just Tatis and just Soto. They got the youth and they're superstar studs and MVP caliber and they're not older. I love Bogarts and Machado. But I'm just saying, if we could just have those 2 and then do some middle tier contracts, you do those 2-year deals, you do those 3-year deal maybe, you get some decent bats, you try and do what you did at the deadline this year and mix and match with platoon stuff at the DH spot. I'd be totally okay with that. Because not to mention, the Padres farm is great again, and we're hopefully going to be talking about that on tomorrow's episode. I don't know for sure. I'm going to be talking to RM Layton about the Padres farm system update. Because, man, it's looking great lately. Shouts to Jackson Merrill, shouts to Salas, shouts to Robbie Snelling, shouts to all those guys, Homer Bush, all those guys. We love them. That would have been a lot more exciting to me. And that's why I was worried. And that's why last offseason, the main move I wanted to do was extend Soto. But then they did everything else. So if they did everything else, if AJ Preller extended all those players thinking he was still going to be able to extend Soto despite all the financial stuff, if he traded for or if he signed Xander Bogaerts without thinking about the Soto problem, if he extended Machado, if he traded for Soto not knowing, if he traded for Soto but still knew I absolutely have the green light to go spend in an offseason full of guys, make up your mind, man. Because they feel like they're Indiana Jones, looking at the golden idol, mesmerized by it, grabbing it without a second's thought, except they forgot about the boulder that's going to come down when they do that. That's what the San Diego Padres and AJ Preller feel like. And that's where we're at. So I think that all in all, I do not think that this article points to the Padres becoming the Mets after Bernie Madoff. I do not think that they're headed for back to what they were before, which was a small market team that barely spent, and we were hoping for Andrew Kashner to save the world, right? Or Khalil Green, or Seth Smith, or Everett Cabrera, or Jed Jerko, whatever. Like, I don't think we're going back to the Stone Age as the Padres, but I do think that this is a huge, huge indictment, not just on AJ Preller as a manager and being just a total lack of vision, in my opinion, and preparing for potential trouble. Again, I don't think that they're in deep trouble. I don't think that the Athletic article says that they're like screwed and that they're going back to spending only $70 million a year. But I do think that for Juan Soto's future, it puts it in even greater risk that the Padres traded a lot of their future, which in fairness, like I can't, it'd be hypocritical not to say, it seems like they're really good at building up that farm again. So maybe that's not going to hurt as much, but those were still assets. And I'd love to be able to keep those assets on top of the guys that are already developing. Because then all of a sudden we'd have a top, 3 farm system instead of a top 11, top 10 that they seem to be developing right now. You know, that would be a lot more exciting and just being like, hey, we still got these assets back. Maybe we could just trade a couple and get some help for a couple years. Maybe you just trade one of those things for, Tommy Pham was really good this year. I'm not saying Tommy Pham, but a player like that. You trade one of those prospects, just one, and you get some reinforcement at deadline. I like that alternate multiverse reality. Shout out Marvel. They're going through stuff. For anyone who's on Twitter yesterday. So that's where I'm at. Again, I think this is really bad for Soto. We're going to talk about potential trade packages, probably all off season, and you're going to get a whole lot of them. So be prepared, because people are probably going to start offering their worst players for our best player now. Do not fall for that. And it'll come from everywhere, from random Twitter things to Bleacher Report articles, whatever. You're going to get a lot of that. It's not the end of the world. I just think that my number one, my most rage-filled thing is just whoops, there goes Tatis. That was hopefully not ominous and foreboding of anything. I just think for them to be in this situation, and there was we're going to let our 3-time manager of the year go. Yet this report comes out, and then the general manager who's been presiding over this and giving out these contracts with help of ownership, he's the one that's staying, though. Meanwhile, Bob Melvin is like, hey, I love the fans and I love the players, but had to go. Yeah. Padres front office needs some work, and I think this is just another thing, another piece of evidence to add on to the growing stack. Not pile, stack. Comical, as tall as the Empire State Building stack of reasons why AJ Preller and management and the front office have been a problem for the Padres, especially as of late. So those are my thoughts, though. All in all, ladies and gentlemen, I hope I didn't confuse you. Again, I highly recommend going and checking out the Athletic article and the Forbes article. Whatever, go check that out. I retweeted both of them onto the @LO_Padres page. You can find them there. Yeah, that's it. That's it, guys. Like I said, hopefully tomorrow we're going to be talking about Padres farm prospects. If not, we'll do some other thing. Maybe another player review. Leave some comments below if you want a specific player me to go over next. Check the player review playlist, by the way, to make sure I haven't done it already. But with that all being said, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast. The only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Until next time, stay safe, and of course, stay faithful. My Friar Faithful homies, take care.